Yes, I do.
All right. Well, everyone knows you're here for the Sword and Sorcery panel, so thanks for waking up early on a Friday. It is Friday. Starting to lose track of that. My name's Seth Lindberg. I'll be your host for the next 50 minutes. So these guys next to me are going to be doing most of the talking. I'm going to get it jump started. Where to start? I have an announcement or two here. One is everyone who came with a ticket, you're eligible for a giveaway. So for me anyway, I only have some large shirts, but I write Sword and Sorcery for a lot of amateur magazines, and they're really weird horror stuff. If anyone wants one, I'll be pulling some cards out and throwing those out at the end. We announced yesterday, or I guess we heard from GenCon, that the late Howard Dater Jones, who's a mentor to a lot of us, and was just mentioned, his name's going to be part of a travel grant going forward, since he mentored so many people here, to get BIPOC or kind of new students to come here from abroad. So we're excited about that. A little nod to Howard. Yeah. If you have any questions during this, raise your hands. We want you guys to be participating with us. So if I see your hand come up, I'll work you in. And at least for the format, we're going to at least roughly go chronologically with describing what is sword and sorcery, describe newer modern day sword and sorcery, and then the last part will be talking about future sword and sorcery. There's several announcements around that. So that's good. So let's start off with introductions from the crew. I want to go from Sean, this one.
My name is Sean Korsgaard. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, longtime award-winning photojournalist, former editor at Bain Books, and most recently a proud father to a 2-year-old boy. I'm currently the editor of Anvil magazine and, well, spoiler alert, in about 30 minutes, editor of a second. You'll hear about that in a bit, but everyone else?
I'm Richard Byers. I've written a lot of sword and sorcery. So a lot of it is tie into sword and sorcery type games. Some of it is original stuff, and a sword and sorcery movie that I wrote is going to be an animated feature. Unfortunately, production, I can't tell you when. Production is not going fast enough to suit me, but eventually it should be out there.
I'm Michael Stackpole. I'm a writer. I've done 70 some odd novels, best known for the X-Wing novels. But my true love and what got me pushed in this direction started working in the industry with Flying Buffalo and freelancing for all sorts of companies. Was the sword and sorcery fiction. I caught it right in the 70s when there was a revival, and it worked the course of my life perfectly.
Andrew Bryan.
Well, yeah. Well, that was already worked.
My name is Bryan Young. I'm a writer, journalist, storyteller in general. These days I'm writing a lot of tie-in fiction with like Battletech and Shadowrun and a lot of game fiction, but I really love telling stories across genres, and Sword and Sorcery is one that I really hold dear to my heart, and I really love telling stories there as often as I am able, and so that's where I'm at. I really love it.
Okay. So I think at least 60% of the people here know about Howard, but we still have to cover the ground. Like, what is sword and sorcery? What is it that maybe you guys know a lot? There might be other classic sword and sorcery that people don't know about. So if we can ground readers and where the roots were.
Am I starting the show?
Jump in if you want.
At least as I was taught by Howard Dater Jones, sword and sorcery consists of 5 elements. The character, because it's a very character-driven genre compared to epic fantasy, which has more ensemble casts. The environment, everything from dying Earths beneath a red star to the far-flung past before Atlantis sank beneath the waves. The sort of foemen they face, magic is very often a source of evil. You're sure a sign that your protagonist is an anti-hero is that he uses magic. The action, more than almost any other element, reading a sword and sorcery novel should make the hairs on your arms stand on end and make your chest pound like a war drum. And the last thing is the writing style. very pulpy because it came of age in that same genre that gave us the noir detective, the Louis L'Amour westerns. And good sword and sorcery will take one or two or three, but great sword and sorcery nails all five and does so in a way that sticks with you forever.
I don't have a lot to add to that in terms of defining the genre. I personally got into, my whole life was warped when I discovered Edgar Rice Burroughs' Martian books on a couple of those on my grandparents' bookshelf, which was otherwise full of books that had absolutely nothing to do with science fiction or fantasy or horror or anything. So I don't know how those couple stray books got on there, but I guess I'm glad they did. And that's Sword and Planet, which is kind of sword and sorcery.
Definitely.
But from there I moved on to Conan and Raynoster Crawford and Elric and Carl Edward Wagner's Cave Stories and Dying Earth and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm a big fan of the genre.
So there's a really good resource out on the internet called archive.org. And one of the subsets of things on archive.org is people have been scanning a lot of the original Weird Tales magazine, which is where sword and sorcery largely originated. And if you look especially for issues running between 1930 and 1937, you'll see a lot of sword and sorcery in there, and authors to look for, Clark Ashton Smith. Because sword and sorcery is kind of the subset of what they used to refer to as weird fiction. And they described it that way up to that point. Most fiction where you had a little bit of magic and stuff like that was just sort of worked historical fiction. You know, you'd be telling the Arthurian tales and you would allow us how Merlin was real. And so you would play with that, but everything was tied very historically. With weird fiction, suddenly you're seeing stories that are in places that never existed, in lands that are far away or distantly buried on our planet. As Sean said, magic plays a big part, and it largely is evil, but again, you get to see, as it progresses, you get to see magic coming to be a part of some of the protagonists as well. But with weird fiction, Clark Ashton Smith, H.P. Lovecraft a little bit, but his stuff was more modern. Robert E. Howard, absolutely, really sort of defined the sword and sorcery. Then there's C.L. Moore with Jerry L. Jory. There's one particular issue, I think it's a 1934 or 35 issue of Weird Tales, April maybe, I think it was one of the 8 months, April or August. But there is a Robert Howard story, Clark Ashton Smith story, and the very first Jerry L. Jory story by C.L. Moore.
Black God's Kiss?
Yes, Black God's Kiss. And so, and I mean, that's like the World Series it's just brilliant. Smith was a poet, and so his stuff is not as purple and pulpy. And he uses words I keep having to go to the dictionary to see what they mean. Howard was very action-oriented and just a really good writer. I think he gets down. People will dismiss him as being a pulp writer, but he was really, really good. Lovecraft, I can't make heads or tails out of. And the C.L. Moore stories were a lot of fun.
I think one of the things that especially because of more contemporary interpretations of sword and sorcery, you look at say the Conan movies, and it erases a little bit of what I think made them so cool in the 30s, is that they were very much contemporaries of Lovecraft. And we look at Lovecraft and we instantly think of the horror elements of Lovecraft, that the Conan stories, the sword and sorcery of that time, were very much part and parcel of. But it seems to have in the pop culture gotten removed of, and we don't instantly think of it, or a lot of people, I think we all kind of do, we remember that, but I think a lot of people forget that was very much in the 30s a chief component of it. If you go back and read the Conan stories, if you read a lot of those stories, especially in Weird Tales, part of what made it that weird fiction was the fact that, that was the common element that made it so that you could publish Lovecraft next to Howard and next to all these other stories. Lovecraft could fit next to Howard even though they were different genres and different time periods, because the weird part that was connecting them was that horror of the unknown and that evil magic and that cosmic terror element to it.
I think that Fritz Lieber said that he thought of his Great Master and Fopper stories as basically horror stories with, swordplay and a fantastic world.
Two other points. One, just speaking of Weird Tales, their business offices were here in Indianapolis. They published out of Chicago, but they were located here for some odd reason. So there's an obscure little tie.
On Monument Circle.
Yeah, they're somewhere over there. Yeah.
Not only that, C.L. Moore lived in Indianapolis when she wrote for Weird Tales. So if you go a couple blocks, there's a bank building that's now a hotel, and the reason she wrote under the name C.L. Moore wasn't to hide the fact she was a woman. Everyone at Weird Tales knew it, except the man who eventually married her. First letter, Mr. Moore. Worked out in the end, but she worked as a stenographer at a bank and had to hide from her boss that she was using company resources in the company mailroom to send off stories.
So that's
Which is wonderful.
our first side quest. Can you repeat where people should go in between?
If you've got time, it's literally just 2 blocks that way. So
The name of the bank or the building?
I'll get it by the end of the panel.
Oh, okay. I wanted to quiz the floor here real quick, because we're at a writer symposium, but so I'd like to know how many people here might be trying to write Sword and Sorcery right now. So you guys are more readers and fans than writers. We get a vote. Yeah. Okay.
One of the things I think is real important also with Fritz Leiber, in a later discussion, Fritz Leiber gets credited with coining Sword and Sorcery, to name it. There apparently was a much earlier usage of saying, the researchers keep trying to track all this stuff down, trying to figure out where it goes. But when Fritz Leiber wrote an essay where he was talking about the nature of sword and sorcery fiction, he noted that the one thing about this subgenre is it's very easy to make fun of it. It's very easy to burlesque or lampoon it. And he said, and this is the thing about sword and sorcery, is it requires the readers to agree that you're basically not going to do that. You agree that this is an other when, this is an elsewhere, and that is just a reality that you are going to accept. And to me, it's always been funny, if somebody writes science fiction, we accept that there is faster than light travel, which is impossible to physics as we know it. But for some reason, having a wizard turn into a snake, even though it's biblical, is not is cause for derision. So it's just one of those things you have to be real careful when, especially when reading. I think sword and sorcery, because there are some people that will lampoon it and not really show it the respect that it's earned.
I think that one reason maybe it doesn't get that respect is that people think of it as kind of all the piece.
Oh yeah.
That every sword and sorcery story is basically the same as every other sword and sorcery story, and I think that the writers that have been invoked, demonstrate that's not the case. Like Park actually stuff is to me, a very ironic tone, and Howard is like I said, it's action, with life, with real horror, and Fritz Leiber's stuff is, it definitely has a kind of a thread of humor running through it that is not present in everything. So there's a lot more variation in terms of the line of attack and the effect that's created than the Dolphins credit.
Well, in Black God's Kiss, the first burial of the George story, it's essentially a psychedelic trip. If it had been first published in the '60s, everybody would be going, "Oh my God, cutting edge!" The fact that it was done, 30 years earlier, suddenly it's pulpy and not worthy of discussion.
Which is especially weird because the sword and sorceries of the 60s were very influenced by their time. You'd never see an odder mix than you could have in one table of contents of 70s sword and sorcery a Black Panther, a Vietnam veteran, a drug-addled hippie, and a songwriter for the Blue Oyster Cult. And all of them took very interesting turns on the genre and really took it into wilder, more interesting places than I think even the Weird Tales crew would have thought possible.
Well, and I also think that's one of the really cool things about sword and sorcery is, so it was there in the 30s, and then after about 37, Lovecraft died, Howard was gone, and Clark Ashton Smith hated writing narrative fiction. He was a poet. And he only wrote narrative fiction to earn money to pay for his parents. He was taking care of his parents. And in 36 and 37, they died. So he walked away from it. So, you know, from 30 to 37, I mean, there was a golden age of this stuff. And then it kind of went away. And then, there was a thing called World War II, you may have seen it, was in the paper. You know, and that kind of, they had other use for paper. So, everything kind of quieted down, and then in the 50s you had a resurgence, and then in the 70s you had a resurgence, and even the last 10, 15 years, there's been a resurgence, and every single time the new writers with that new generation are bringing a different perspective to it. You know, it's not just retreading the old stuff, whereas if you look at a genre like mysteries, it's still retreading the old stuff. You know, it's just, now you have cell phones, and so that's a complication for mystery writers, and I feel terribly sad for them. But really, in sort of sorcery, you're looking at a lot of innovation, a lot of difference. And the other thing, and again, quite appropriate for being in GenCon, one of the things that from that 70s revival that really sustained it until the new revival now has been role-playing games. Because I mean, more often than not, role-playing adventures are these side, they are side quests, sword sorcery side quests for a campaign.
I mean, that first edition of D&D had Appendix N in every volume, a reading list of basically a murderer's row of what was then the must-read of sword and sorcery, everything from Howard to Moorcock to Andre Norton. And if you're looking for a recommended reading list, Appendix N is a great place to start. And as you touched on, even game mechanics. The alignment system was pulled from Michael Moorcock. He has order versus chaos play out throughout his Eternal Champion cycle. Jack Vance more or less invented the magic system.
Jack Vance invented the magic system. Gary pulled it from Jack Vance. there is a difference. Let's give Vance credit.
It was a little less rude than what Warhammer did to Moorcock, pulling all of the chaos elements.
Yes.
And then copywriting, and then brutally suing anyone who uses the word chaos in anything.
Brief aside, imagine taking Space Marines from Heinlein, Chaos from Moorcock, and then trying to copyright both.
You got a question from the crowd?
Yeah, so I was very interested in the time that sword and sorcery arose during the Great Depression, because we've been talking a lot about how the 70s were influencing the writers of that particular revival.
Right.
How much do you think the Great Depression actually was something that was driving the writing? Maybe the writing was a response to some of the hardships of the Great Depression at the time?
Certainly the escapism aspect of it, huge. I mean, that's why pulp magazines thrived with fiction and all the hero magazines like Doc Savage and The Shadow, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was certainly a huge part of it. One of the other things which was going on during that time is that Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Howard, E. Hoffman Price, a lot of the writers who were writing back then corresponded with each other, and they would occasionally visit each other. And so they had their own community, and it was, like I say, huge correspondence, sending stories back and forth, linking stories back and forth. They couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't do anything, so that was a chunk of it. Absolutely.
I think there's something about a lot of storytelling in the 20s and 30s, late 20s, through the 30s, through the Depression, where there's a very common storytelling structure that you see where Charlie Chaplin used it, right? Where it's a guy down on his luck who's looking for a job and gets into, with Chaplin, it was a wacky adventure. Most Three Stooges stories through the 30s and even into the 40s use the structure where it's like, hey, we need a job, we're gonna get into a wacky adventure. And how many Conan stories started like that, where he's just like wandering into a place and needs to get a job, and his adventures were very sword and sorcery, right? And you look at the Depression, and a lot of people, that was just sort of like the mode of their existence, right? Like, we wander into a place, we need to find a job. It was very, it's something that I've often thought about, and looking at stories from that era across genres, where it's a very common story trope, like just across the board. And I think that is a result of the Great Depression. I think somebody should research more into that.
I think that there's like a subset of it, even more general storytelling trope, which is kind of the wandering hero. You know, the hero wants a new place, and there's always trouble brewing that he's going to deal with.
I definitely agree, but I think there's something about how much more popular and more pervasive that particular style was in that Depression era.
And also, I think when you look at the background of a lot of these writers, and when you just, beyond the writers that we're talking about with sword and sorcery, but you look at the pulp writers in general, these were people who, unlike most, you have to remember before World War I, most Americans didn't travel more than 20 miles away from where they were born. And all of a sudden they were forced, they arrived in Europe, places they could not have found on a map. You know, there were magazines out there full of sailor stories, and chunks of them were written by guys who had, for the last 10 years, been traveling as part of the Merchant Marine. Now, also, Robert Howard wrote tons of those stories, never having left, having gone to Mexico a couple of times. Having a good imagination, doing your research, that counts for a lot. But when you go through the pulp writers back in those days, they had so much more in the way of experience, at least to my mind, than any of us do up here. I mean, Sean, having been in the Army, is probably, the most attuned to what their sort of base qualification was. But, oh my God,
it took me as a high school dropout, so probably not that high a bar.
No, there were a bunch of them that were high school dropouts that, went over and joined the AEF and then, went traveling around and stuff like that. So they had wonderful adventures, and also because people hadn't seen that stuff, they just lived and loved going through these stories that were showing them new places. And most of the time the new places were in this world, but then you have the sword and sorcery stuff where they're showing them worlds that don't exist and are just based in imagination.
This might be a good lead. I'm curious on how this stuff, obviously, different things are occurring now than the 30s. So I'm curious how more modern, anywhere from the 50s to current times, how the additional waves of zeitgeist has informed sword and sorcery, and maybe in your own writings even, when you try to design a story. Were you cognizant of trying to reflect modern day culture? Or?
So, as touched on, sword and sorcery has gone through cycles. It did that big peak in the 30s with the Weird Tales generation. You still had some authors in the 50s and 60s. My favorite oddball of the bunch is John Jakes, who later sold 50 million copies of Civil War fiction, won the Pulitzer Prize. His pride and joy was a barbarian character named Brack the Barbarian. Terrific stuff, he gets beaten up all the time, and you totally get why he wrote war fiction later on. But then you have the 70s and 80s where you had all that economic malaise, changeover, radically, just the world shifting in very strange and sometimes scary ways. Then epic fantasy comes along in the 90s, and the 90s was a good time for a lot of people. The 90s sucked if you wrote sword and sorcery. When working for Bain Books, they published Sword and Sorcery in the 90s, and the look in my editor's eyes talking about it, you can usually only see in the VFW talking to guys that fought at Fallujah. Awful time. But then it started seeing a resurgence in the 2010s and 2020s, which is also a time of weird change, uncertainty, economic malaise, and looking at how bad things were in the 70s and 30s, I apologize to all of you, but at least we'll get great Sword and Sorcery content.
Yeah, I don't think that I've written Sword and Sorcery where I was like consciously trying to reflect the time or anything like that. But I mean, I think that my stuff probably does anyway because I live here, and I think you probably don't have to orient on that consciously to have it, permeate what you do.
I think there's an element of like, you read a lot of this stuff from the 30s and you're like, wow, it's racist, right? Like, I don't think there's any doubt about it. Like, and there's no sugarcoating that. There's definitely, like, there's some stuff in Conan stories, right, that is like unequivocally like, this would not fly if you were publishing it today. And when I write Sword and Sorcery stuff today, it's not like I'm trying to consciously go like, I'm going to undo all this damage that Conan did. There's nothing I can do to do that, but I'm not going to make those same mistakes. Like, so like in that way, I'm conscious of like where, like I'm not gonna fall in those pits. But it's also like my tastes are way different, and I'm not inventing it from whole cloth like these guys were. So like all of those influences and all of those games that I've played and like all of that stuff is going in, so it's all getting built out of that stuff in a different way.
Good. So is there, I'll use the term old school. Is there an old school Sword and Sorcery that you would recommend? Let's say you have a friend who is very sensitive to all that. Now, not violence, because you can find out about violence, I'm not sure you could. But, how they treat women, or is there, I'd love to be able to say, hey, just read this. This is a cool, a cool particular Sword and Sorcery flavor, and that they're something with sensibilities. And the one I always throw out was the Amber books. I'm not sure if they're Sword and Sorcery.
Zelazny is very much a Sword and Sorcery.
Yeah,
More for Dildish the Damned than Amber.
Right. But is there something that you'd recommend that you say, hey, just hook them into this one and slowly, I don't want to say it's, it's not beige, but it's not also offensive in any way. Is there something you could recommend?
Oh, I mean, is like, you mean from back in the day or currently?
Like Bryan had said about Conan, right? Or H.P. Lovecraft, right? Something is very sensitive to that kind of stuff. You don't want to say stay away, but be aware of it. But is there an old school writer that wouldn't have a warning label?
I don't
even think Conan really merits a warning label.
I mean, again, it depends on the level of sensitivity.
Right.
Okay, I mean, for example, the use of the word Oriental to refer to people from Asia, it's rife. I mean, and that's just anything you read from that era. That's just part and parcel of it. And so if that's a trigger, then no. The nice thing with Sword and Sorcery is today, for example, there's a magazine called New Edge Sword and Sorcery. It comes out of Canada. They kickstart their stuff, but they have wildly diverse and really well-written stories. And they're written today. They're very conscious of those triggers. And those are things that I think once you get somebody reading Sword and Sorcery and they understand what the genre is, that's when you say, if you want to go back and read some of these other stories, then be aware that it's possibly there. Another one that I would recommend is Carl Edward Wiegand. The Kane stories.
And he pushes some real boundaries.
Yes, yeah. Carl was a brilliant writer. He knew tons of the writers from that pulp era, and he had his own press where he would reprint. He reprinted some E. Hoffman Price. Did 2 volumes of Hugh Cave stories. did a couple volumes of Meliway Wellman stories. His character Kane, really good. I don't recall those as being, as having the same trigger warnings. There might be a few things because those were written in the 70s, early 80s. So, a language had not fully evolved.
Like I said, just
The big-
make people aware of it.
The big-
I would just add to that I think that there's 2 volumes of Kane's short stories, and that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
very, very
Yeah.
best of Kane. The
Yeah.
3 novels are good, but they all kind of have the same plot.
But yeah, the short stories are really, really good. A magazine I work for in this industry, Sorcerer's Apprentice, we published it in Flying Buffalo. Carl had stopped writing Kane stories, and we got him to do a brand new one.
You hero.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. So I'm a big fan of Kane stories.
For people who want to read Conan, what would you, would you recommend your Conan book as a more modern take?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah. I did the novelization for the Jason Momoa Conan movie. But what was nice is that the studio did not have approval of the novel. It was the guys who owned Conan properties. So after I saw a rough cut, we were walking back to their office, and I turned to my contact and I said, "Tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to write the novel from which the movie was taken. I'm not going to novelize the movie." So I gave it an ending. I rearranged certain things to make it make sense. But obviously, that was written in the last 20 years, and so again, the language was far more evolved. So.
I will say, among living authors, this man here is one of the 3 people alive who just nails Robert E. Howard's style, prose, tone, approach. Just awesome, Mike.
Thank you.
But I
There's a
guess
lot of Conan pastiches that sadly don't echo the original, I think.
Well, and I think part of that. So after Howard died, and Glenn Lord, who was his agent, became the estate agent. I'm not sure how quite that worked, because Roosevelt Klein was his agent when he died. But they brought together Lynn Carter and L. Sprague Camp to sort of put this stuff together and in the 70s grind out more material. And some of the things which I hate are when DeCamp or Carter took non-Conan stories and just, except they had to be retyping them, it would have been a search and replace. And it's horrible. It's not Conan, and there were reasons for that, because they were taking much earlier stories that Howard had written and trying to pass them off as later stories that Howard would have written, and it's like, no, he had matured as a writer and those things. But Sprague de Camp specifically was sort of the guy who oversaw a lot of the pastiches that were being written by Leonard Carpenter and Robert Jordan and a lot of people during that during the 80s era. And Sprague had the vision that Conan was the noble savage. And Conan was never the noble savage. Conan was the wolf at the edge of the firelight from you're out at night, you build a fire, and you see the glowing eyes out there. And Conan was either going to come in and kill you, or was there to help you fight off what was even deeper out in the shadows. And that was the nature of that character.
I think there's a line in a Conan novel that even goes to that effect, something akin to, there will come a time when your civilization crumbles and you'll pray for a rough man with a sword.
Yep, for Howard, who grew up in Texas, and that whole gunslinger thing of, we need, one guy with a gun to destroy the bad guys with guns, and stuff you see in Shane and all of those things, he just translated it there. And every single Conan story, the one thing Conan knows is that civilization is a thin veneer. And when civilization collapses, everybody becomes animals.
I think you say that, and I don't think it's any surprise that that Howard was, near the end of his life trying to transition out of sword and sorcery and into writing westerns.
Oh, and he was doing a great job doing westerns too. The Breckenridge Elkin stuff is great, and I have this,
That's a different rabbit hole. That's a different
The seminal tragedy of American fantasy is that Robert E. Howard committed suicide at 30 after inventing 5 genres instead of living another 50 years.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
And as far as the stuff goes, Robert E. Howard's Foundation puts out all of this stuff unaltered, unedited. Check it out, find something you love.
And you can very easy, again, on archive.org, you can find the original Weird Tales magazines, download the PDFs. You will see it exactly the way it was supposed to be. Viewed.
The way the editors put it out.
Well, yeah.
Well, we can transition a bit into how sword and sorcery still exists today. And it's awesome. We talked about a resurgence. Mike mentioned New Age sword and sorcery.
Right.
Term New Age actually kind of came out of a bunch of blogs and posts and writings from Howard Andrew Jones, who edited Tales from a Magician's Skull magazine, which is still
The best modern sword and sorcery magazine, at least when he was editing.
Yeah, so now Outland Entertainment runs that, but that's still continuing. I think there's a Dark Moon Quarterly, there's
Dark Moon Quarterly.
Savage Realms, I forget, maybe you got off a couple other markets.
Sursova, Old Moon, Heroic Fantasy Quarterly,
Yeah, Crimson Quill.
Crimson Quill,
Yeah.
DMR Books.
Yeah, DMR book.
As much as Trad Pub has gone more towards epic fantasy and romantasy more recently, the independent publishing and small press scene has more than taken the torch on sword and sorcery. And everything from New Age to heroic fantasy to Tales of the Magician's Skull, they've been doing really inventive, wild stuff, and a generation of authors have cut their teeth doing stuff that would have made the golden and silver age sword and sorcery authors proud.
Absolutely.
I don't know, some of those old Golden Age ones weren't even proud of their own stuff.
I mean, is any writer proud of their own stuff?
I mean, a lot of them seem to be running from it, trying to get into other stuff.
But that was because of the ecology of magazines back
Yeah,
then.
that's true.
Every one of the pulp writers was trying to get into the slicks.
Yeah.
If Howard had lived another 20 years into the paperback era, he probably would have been just as comfortable staying in fantasy.
No, he would have been Louis L'Amour.
Yeah, that's
Would have been
true.
Louis L'Amour.
Yeah.
And we would have never heard of Louis L'Amour.
So for crafting a modern day sword and sorcery tale, maybe from the behind, and I think most people here are more readers than writers, but if you were to try to think of behind the scenes perspective you can share about the elements you would put in that maybe even a reader doesn't even know when they're picking up a tale.
So, for some odd insight, while working at Bain, I acquired Howard Andrew Jones' Lord of the Shattered Land for the company. I can work in this industry another 50 years and that'll probably still go in my obituary as one of my proudest achievements. It's probably the best fantasy novel of the decade and a generational work of sword and sorcery. But I think the way it's structured, is the blueprint for sword and sorcery moving forward. The way Howard would describe it is each book is like a season of television. It's broken down into episodic chapters that are themselves broken down into little segments, which not only gives it that sort of short story, serialized feel from classic sword and sorcery. How many of you listen to audiobooks? Read your ebooks on your phone or a Kindle. It's perfect for listening to on your commute or reading on a coffee break. And it has natural pausing points and breaking points that lends itself very well to the multimedia format. And sword and sorcery allows that in a way that epic fantasy really doesn't. And I think we're already seeing a couple attempts to emulate that from other authors. I know C.L. Warner, who writes Warhammer author, terrific author, has a character named Shintara Oba, who's a demon-slaying Ronin, that he's trying to format a bunch of his serialized stories into a similar format. And I hope we've seen the first attempt. We need the second and the third before it really takes off as the formula to follow. And I hope I see it.
As far as what elements I would bring to it, I've got a couple of sword and sorcery series that are all my own, and they both they both kind of follow the one follows kind of the wandering hero thing where it's like he finds a place that is trouble and he's the guy to fix it, you know. And the other one is comparable. It's comparable. It's all set in one city, but the things keep happening. And he keeps being the one who's hired to deal with it. In both cases, it's kind of a you know, the hero is not like a shining, saintly character who gets involved with these things because it's the right thing to do so much. It's because he's getting paid to do it. And I kind of feel comfortable with that approach, particularly as the sword and sorcery. The character kind of has, you know, mud on his boots and avarice in his heart.
I think that writing it today, the influence of gaming cannot be discounted. You know, the fact that you can have warlocks and wizards off doing adventures, having those episodic adventures. You know, it doesn't have to be an outsider swordsman that does all this stuff to death. I think that you know, now we could easily define sword and sorcery as a literature of side quests. Take any epic fantasy or any game setting and a side quest where one character or only a couple of characters are going off and dealing with a problem is effectively a sword and sorcery story. So there's many avenues and many avenues to get there. You know, in terms of experimenting and stuff, one of the things I've been toying around with just because of a circumstance is I've started doing some epistles. They are letters from an ancient monster fighter to his great grandnephew, describing, you know, things that happened back in the day. They're much lighter in tone, but it's describing, you know, it's a sword and sorcery adventure. It's just a different slide. So there's action, there's all the elements in there, but it's all couched in the terms of advice to you, my nephew, don't make these mistakes that I did, you know, all that sort of stuff. And so it just, and that's the thing which I like about sword and sorcery is I think that it's robust enough of a genre that it can handle some different treatments. Again, as long as you're not trying to lampoon it, I think it all holds up really well.
The thing I've noticed in the sword and sorcery I've been writing, for me, and I think part of it's the gaming influence, is that it's sort of evolved, at least for me, from a solitary figure to a duo.
Sure.
Because I think as we game, there's the back and forth between the characters that I think people really enjoy. And if you notice, in a lot of the favorite sword and sorcery stories that we like, or you know, your favorite Conan stories or whatever, even for the one adventure, Conan gets paired with somebody that he has the back and forth with. So it's not so far out of the realm, but pairing them permanently with somebody.
You're fought for the Grey Master for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Thaddeus and Dom.
And so the duo is something that I really like to work with, and really leaning into the horror elements where I can, because I think in a lot of the more modern sword and sorcery that I've read, it's so far influenced by the 80s movie movements of sword and sorcery, where so much of that was sort of stripped out, so it's much more action and much more Arnold Schwarzenegger than it was literary sword and sorcery, that playing in the horror space and sort of that level of uncanny is so much more fun and interesting to me, but with characters that are very like hopeful and optimistic, and that contrast is really fun for me. And those are the things that I really like playing with the stuff that I'm doing.
Good question back here.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for being here today, by the way. When you guys write a story and you decide to spin a character off, what makes you decide to do that? To give someone their own story? Like, is it just an inspiration? Are they screaming at you like, I need my own time? Or how does that work for you guys in writing?
A general answer is yes, all of those.
every time it's different. For example, the first short story I ever sold was Tales of the Magician's Skull. It may be in a future issue, I may have to find a new home for it, but it follows it was the result of three things. The pandemic in 2020, dealing with a lot of PTSD from the military, and watching a lot of Shaw Brothers movies. And I just took all three of those elements and made sort of a Lovecraft. Imagine if John Woo directed a movie version of At the Mountains of Madness. And it's starring a young version of Conan, who has a lot of trauma. Or conversely, I had another character who I'm in negotiations for a home for, where the name came first. Harkin the Bastard. Where the course of the stories deals with the fact that he is chasing down his illegitimate father and siblings. It is literally that he's a bastard, not that he is cruel or unkind. Like one of his other details is he loves his father who raised him. He's very important that this guy he's chasing down is his sire, not my father. Little details like that, I think, shape the narrative. Like that's driven the rest of the planning for these stories I plan around that character.
We got like 5 minutes left. I want to make sure y'all have a chance to say, wrap it up. And,
Of course. Sorry.
We'll start off with, I guess, Bryan. Let's see, about a minute or so to any last thoughts you have about aspiring gamers or readers of Sword and Sorcery, and also any pitches you might want for current projects.
Just for aspiring readers or writers of Sword and Sorcery, just write stories that make you happy, read stories that make you happy. If Sword and Sorcery is where you want to be, write that stuff and just write the stories you want to read. As far as where to find me and current stuff I'm working on, if you want, I've got, it's pulp sci-fi, but I've got some free magazines I did for a sci-fi zine if you want some, and some cards with my website on them. You can find some stuff from me and books and stuff that I'm doing. I've got a panel on brainstorming next in Ballroom 1, and then a signing at the Catalyst Game Labs booth with Mike at noon. That's me for the immediate future. Oh, and I do have a new Sword and Sorcery story on Mike's Chain Story project, which I'm sure he will tell you about when he wraps up in just a moment.
So Bryan just mentioned the Chain Story. There's a website called Chain Story Core, Chain Story Core, C-O-R-E, because I was not smart enough to just at the same time buy a Chain Story project, which is how, as we all talk about it now, this is how it's become. But I have acquired that, and you'll soon be pointing at the same thing. In any event, what the Chain Story is I put together a MacGuffin, talked to a bunch of my writer friends, and said, want you to write Sword and Sorcery stories using the MacGuffin. Okay, it may show up as a decoration in the background, it may be a central piece of your story, I do not care. Do something with it, and if you're not going to do a second story with it, get rid of it at the end of your story and let someone else play with it. So the Chain Story launched beginning of July. Bob Bartman and I got the first 2 stories, then Bryan was up. We just did Rigel Allure, and I think you're up next. And so these are free stories.
Terrific.
Yeah, and so just the way the project works, every author hosts the story on their own website or platform of choice. The stories are free for 3 months. We push all the traffic to the writers. We are not, this is so writers get exposure. The whole idea of the project is every author antes their audience up for a chance at winning everybody else's audience. And so this is, I've basically got a 5-year plan for this, so, strap in and there'll be plenty of stories out there.
I'm Richard Byers, and I wrote the movie, the animated Sword and Sorcery movie called The Plague Knight, which, watch for it, you'll see it someday, I hope. All my books are, the fiction is pretty much available on Amazon. A lot of it is also available as audiobooks on Audible, and I'll be around through the convention.
So, I mentioned I'm launching a second magazine. Seth, what time is it?
Got 1 minute, if you have.
No, I mean like what time specifically?
10:45.
As of 19 minutes ago, I'm the editor of Battleborn magazine, which launched on Indiegogo today. My goal with the magazine is I want to be able to highlight not just the best of modern sword and sorcery, but for people who haven't been acquainted with the classics, reprint some of the older stories, reprint some of the diamonds in the rough, but as a whole, provide 60,000 pages of character-driven, blood and thunder, heroic fantasy, sword and sorcery. The kind of stuff that makes your pulse pound, your heart soar, and burns a hole in your head and your soul the way that only sword and sorcery can. If my excitement wasn't big enough, clearly. And just a brief show of hands from our other panelists. Raise your hand if you've either submitted a story already or I've asked you to.
I think so, yeah.
Just so you know that the level of quality is there, but there have been some incredible stories that stir the heart, make you want to pump iron or rock out, and I just can't wait to share them with the world. And I hope you will too. So grab that QR code and see exactly what Battleborn has in store for every one of you.
That's on Indiegogo, and you have some you have a fresh painted art.
I actually do have one last surprise. The cover reveal for issue 1. And for background, 3 of the bigger characters in Sword and Sorcery of the last decade have been Hannibal from Howard Andrew Jones, Soromus from Greg Mell. He has an Aztec Greek-style fantasy setting, and C.L. Warner's Shintaro Oba. All 3 of them are on the cover.
Yeah, those are all good stories. Those are really, really good stories.
Let's hear it for the panel, so we're gonna get kicked out, but don't go because I'm gonna give some t-shirts away. So let's thank everybody.
Read the classics and go find some new ones.
In my books, my heroes are basically necromancers with swords. So this is anyone interested. I have the largest. This is an extra larger, so slightly smaller. So it's got to be Scott Torres. If you want it, it's yours. All right. Next,
And
have Emily Ulrich.
Alternative versions and
Want it?
have a vote.
All right. Next would be Aaron Fletcher. Want it? Okay, here we go. We got a couple of minutes. We want to say hi to these guys, and then they're going to kick us out. So,
Seth, hit the pretty red button.
what's that?
Hit the pretty red button.
Oh, the pretty red button.